Good evening. I'm Gracelyn Guyol, and welcome to Restoring Health Holistically. This is the third season of this series, and I started it because in 2002, I ended my bipolar symptoms without drugs. And I wanted to share what I had done and what many other people have done to heal themselves of serious illnesses using non-drug approaches. That's what this series is about, and in each one I interview a practitioner or someone who has expertise in holistic medicine. I was raised a vegetarian in the 1950s, but it was not a healthy diet in those days. It included a lot of milk and butter and cream and processed pasta and a lot of overcooked vegetables. I abandoned it in my late teens when I noticed I felt better when I ate a little animal protein. But the nutritional approach that is taught by the Hippocrates Health Institute is very different today. It's about living foods. And why might this be important enough for me to want to share it with you? A 2008 Vegetarian Times study showed that 7.3 million people in the US are vegetarians, 59% of them female and 41% male. Another 22 million follow a vegetarian inclined diet. A 2009 poll found that 7.5 million people were using the title vegan to describe the way they were eating, which means they eat no meat, seafood, poultry, only living plant-based foods. Yet many young people especially make these choices without studying or fully understanding how to create a healthy diet without animal protein, one that delivers all the essential nutrients that the body needs to function. And without proper guidance, vegetarians might not get adequate calcium, so they might have weaker bones, or if they're children and growing, their bones will not be strong enough. They may not get enough vitamin B12, since most of the B vitamins are available in plants, but B12 is primarily found in animal protein. So without adequate B12, you can have mental disorders, including dementia and stroke, increased heart problems, nerve damage, anemia, and a lot of other medical problems. So knowing what you're doing is really important if you're going to be a vegan or a vegetarian. Today's show is a talk by an expert, Dr. Brian Clement, who is the director of the renowned Hippocrates Health Institute in Florida. He has been its director for 40 years, and it is one of the leading complementary residential health centers in the world. Clement jokes that he was a pioneer in the field of obesity. He was fat even before most of America was fat. He was raised eating the standard American diet, which you'll hear referred to as the SAD diet, one that's primarily meat, processed foods, sugary sodas, and other unhealthy frankenfoods, GMOs, and things like that. By the age of 20, he was unfit and gasping for breath with every step. He met a 30-year-old vegetarian who was healthy, and this made him decide to eat in a new direction. 3 years later, Clement had lost 120 pounds, and he experienced major health improvements. He was inspired by Anne Wigmore's book, Be Your Own Doctor. So he gradually became a vegan. His degree in biochemistry and a deep interest in nutrition made him decide to visit Wigmore, who founded Hippocrates Health Institute at that time in Boston. She convinced him to help others understand the health benefits of eating raw, living foods. Clement spent 3 years in Europe for Hippocrates, followed by another year as a director of a famous Danish raw food establishment. He returned to the United States in the 1980s and became director of Hippocrates Health Institute, moving it to Florida in 1987. In September 9 of this year, he lectured in Mystic, Connecticut. And that lecture was sponsored by a woman by the name of Dr. Jackie Campisi, who will be on next week's show. His lecture has been edited to fit the limitations of our program. So I would like to introduce you via a videotape of Dr. Clement's lecture. I hope you enjoy it.
We started this endeavor with our founder, Ann Wigmore, who in 1952 was told by the Harvard doctors she had 90 days to live. Now, the good news for her and all of us is that back in Europe, her grandmom was a village doctor. And she actually sat at her side and watched 100 years ago, a century ago, grandmom used herbs and food and love to bring people back to life. So she knew that the well-credentialed, well-meaning physicians at our most renowned university hospital in America were wrong. And she went home and she did all of those things and healed herself and could not hold back. She had no formal education. As a matter of fact, I don't think she graduated high school. And she, in the shadow of Harvard and Boston College and Tufts University and Boston University and some of the great institutions of education and medicine on the planet Earth, she began Hippocrates Health Institute nearly 60 years ago. And from those early days, as Caroline said, hundreds of thousands of people have come to us from every single corner of the globe. We now recognize there's not one country that's not represented who came to Hippocrates. As we sit here today, there are people from 8 countries at Hippocrates. We have such a dilemma. I was on a radio program today in New York City with healthcare that I've observed over the last 5.5 years in 29 countries I've addressed people in. Actually, 250,000 people, 250,000 people, 29 countries, last 5.5 years. I've asked them, as I will you now, how many of you feel safe when you or a loved one is in a hospital? Do you realize I've never had one person raise their hand in 250,000 people? And why? Because what should be the safest place on the planet Earth, safer than your home, safer than your bedroom, safer than your bed, has become a dangerous place that you can not only lose your life, it's the second killer. They admit today, statistically, the second killer of Americans is modern medicine. That's pretty scary stuff. Obviously, they're not making enough money because you're not that sick. When statistically, we are the sickest people who have ever lived in America in the history of humanity. That the statistics are profoundly shocking when you think about them. 57% of Americans will contract cancer in their lifetime. The year 1900, 3%. So we've gone from 3% to 57%. And diseases we didn't have before, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, now are growing in leaps and bounds. When I was at university a long time ago, they used to call adult onset diabetes what our children are now getting. We used to say very easily, a lot of the doctors that are here know, we were told that if you contract diabetes before you're 27, it was childhood diabetes. After 27, it was adult onset diabetes. But 2 out of 3 people contracting adult onset diabetes now are children below 16. And believe me, it's not genetics. As a matter of fact, back the last 2 days of May this year, my very brilliant and wonderful colleague, Dr. Yu, said to me, we've got to have a symposium for the researchers that are legitimate researchers from major universities worldwide that are being laughed at and scrutinized and losing their tenure because they're doing legitimate work and telling the truth that disease is not genetic, cancer is not genetic. And when they tell these truths and prove it with research, that everything is metabolism that's affected by your lifestyle. It's lifestyle that affects your metabolism. They almost lose their jobs or lose their jobs. So we gathered this desperate, wonderful, courageous group of men and women And you can actually see this entire symposium, over 400 hours that we filmed. We live streamed worldwide. And if you get on the Hippocrates website and click on the right side of our front page, it's called Food is Medicine. And there is the real science of today. And that's where we're going to start tonight. Now, why we are having a major problem in modern medicine is not because there's bad people who want to hurt you doing it. It's because the system is outrageously broken because it's primitive and primal. It really talks in almost a similar way to what we would have thought in medicine 500 years ago. Everything is based upon bean counting. What I mean by that is quantitative and qualitative. What you see is real, what you don't see is not real. When you have something like a cancerous tumor, their remedy is, let's cut it out and tell the people they're cured. And sillily, you believe it, that you're cured because it's cut out. And very, very few people actually say, well, how did it get there to begin with? And may it come back again? And the answer is inevitably no. Why do we have diseases today that are devastating our youth that didn't exist a generation ago? Because we have destroyed our immune systems. And when you really understand how we have destroyed the immune system, it is bizarre. Not weird, but bizarre. I was getting on the stage 2.5 years ago at a medical conference speaking, and one of my perceived nemesis was coming off, the former head of the Food and Drug Administration, Dr. David Kessler, who I actually thought had done some pretty evil things in his tenure. But he quit abruptly. Nobody understood why. I unwisely thought that was a good thing. He took my arm, made me look in his eyes, and said, I used to think guys like you were quacks, no more. That broke the ice. I said, David, what are you doing now? He said, I'm working desperately on childhood obesity. Now, if you understand that 7 out of 10 of our children in this country, 7 out of 10 are overweight, obese, or morbidly obese, if you think you're sick, you wait. Wait till your grandchildren and children in 10 and 20 years become adults. Because we are going to be crippled on our knees and bleeding from every orifice because the economy cannot bear an unsustainable system that we call the healthcare system that has little to no effect. It's that simple. And I said, that's a really noble cause. And he went on to say something as I'm up speaking in front of hundreds of physicians that stunned me. He said, I found that every major food industry, which are multinational, global food industries, have chemists on their payroll that their entire job is to invent synthetic opiates to put it into your foods, commercial, fast foods, cookies, potato chips that you buy here at your shops, so that you and your children and everyone you know is permanently addicted to that particular food. When you know that you have no environmental protection agency, and I'll give you one small point. In the year 1993, the Environmental Protection Agency basically said, fluoride causes cancer. Now, how many of you know that fluoride causes cancer? So at least 20% of you do. Most of you, when I say fluoride, you think it's good for your teeth. You know where fluoride comes from? It's a byproduct, a waste product from the aluminum industry. And they didn't know what to do with it, so they conned municipalities and the public, and they told you it was good for the teeth. That type of fluoride is not good for your teeth, by the way. Fluoride from natural organic foods, plants, can be helpful, but minimally. It's not fluoride, it's strontium that you need for your teeth and bones. And the Environmental Protection Agency admitted this in 1993. Now, you would think they walk across the hall and say to the FDA, let's outlaw it immediately. There hasn't been one town, village, city in America that reduced fluoride since then. Where all of my friends and colleagues in Europe, there's only one country that made an evil pact with America that still permits fluoride in their water, called Ireland, my heritage. No European country permits fluoride in their water. No European country permits genetic modified food. But unless you're eating 100% organic, plant-based diet, I'm going to tell you you're getting genetically modified Roundup because it's in high fructose corn syrup. You can hardly find a commercial food that doesn't have high fructose corn syrup in it, including a lot of the food you get at the local organic store. Single-cell life forms in the green plants they spawn possess receptor-like chargeable batteries that convert this energy into matter, protein. Now, in biological science, we just love protein because everything's made of protein. How many of you know the chair you're sitting on is made of protein? Your entire body is made of protein because in the quantitative limit thinking, beginnings and ends, we actually see every cell is actually having a fibrin. What holds a cell together is a protein. Now that's great and it's wonderful, but it's like me saying, look at your skin, that's who you are. Well, if you have any idea of what's really happening, you would be offended if I said all you are is the skin on the outside of your body. You should say, I have blood, I have bones, I have organs, I have emotional states, I have spiritual states. Would I be right or would you be right? And so how shallow we look in modern medicine is at the skin. We don't even go to the second layer beyond that. And what happened is, through evolution, to create life as we know it on this planet, these blue-green algae were created. Now we think what we today call vitamin C and nitrogen, which makes things grow, came together and formed the first plant called blue-green algae. This created oxygen. Now, if oxygen did not come, you wouldn't be here, nothing would be here as we know it. The evolution of matter. It evolved into this wonderful couple, John and Mary, who were hiking up there on Mount Washington. Matter has evolved into endless life forms, including humans. Life forms are perpetually connected to and contain these frequencies. So you see them as a body, in this case, two attractive young bodies, but what they really are is frequencies. Isn't that amazing? And so when we at Hippocrates have guests come in the first day, there's two cutting-edge tests that we do. One is called the cyber scan. It takes 30 seconds. You put your hand on the cyber scan. In 30 seconds, we look at 100,000 parameters. Things that may or may not be good in your body. And it all is determined upon electromagnetic frequency, not counting cells, counting beams. The second thing we do is we look at the energy projected outside of you. This is Russian technology that has evolved after 75 years to where it is today. That takes 1 minute, a little bit longer. So in 1 minute and 30 seconds, we can actually figure out what you're emitting from yourself emotionally, physically, psychologically, and biologically. I can assure you that if you took all of the greatest devices at the top universities worldwide, that these pieces of equipment that cost me less than $40,000 are far more effective. Far more effective. There they go. Appearance and perception, as well as limited imagination. My biggest curse, your biggest curse is that. Do you realize if we had incredibly large imaginations, we would be capable of doing anything? Even I have a problem with this one. I think, well, I can stretch, I can't go any further. Could you imagine if you said, oh, I have cancer, it's going to go away tomorrow? Do you realize that if you actually could believe that in every single cell in your body, you could make that happen? And I see this 4 or 5 times a year. In medicine, we have to give it names, so we call it spontaneous remissions. No such thing. I call it scared shitless. Person finally says, oh my God, I have stage 4 cancer, I'm going to die, I better do something. And they so absolutely eradicate the negative thought out of their mind, doctors are stunned when they say in weeks, a tumor that could have been measured at 10 and 20 centimeters is now completely evaporated and gone. Now we see this and have seen it for 60 years. We're the anti-hospice movement. And guess what? We don't do it. We have never healed a person out of the tens of thousands of people that take claim that they came to Hippocrates, like Jackie's doing, and healed. We don't heal people. I have a full-time job healing who? You. Me. I can't heal my 4 children, my 4 grandchildren, my loving wife. I can't heal you. That's a con job, by the way. And hopeless, irresponsible patients go to hopeless, irresponsible physicians, and you play the game together. Oh, doctor, help me. Okay, I'll help you, but it's a big bill, you know. And you write a prescription, you go down and get some. Well, doctor, that didn't work. Well, let's try this one. And after the third prescription, you say, well, that bastard doesn't know what he's talking about. And you go to another one, and they write another prescription. When are you going to realize? Like every day, people say to me, you know, I did what they said 3 times and it didn't work. Do you think I should do it the 4th? I said, a great idea. If you make it after the 4th, you maybe should go back to the 5th. Some of them don't even get the humor in what I'm saying. You know, we're not responsible. So your limited imagination has propelled humanity into a deep sense of insecurity. So you're insecure, you doubt everything. How is it possible? If this was true, they would be telling me this at the doctor. I know all the stupid, because I was there. I was right there along with you. It would be really nice if I didn't have to take any responsibility for my life. It would be really nice if I could drive my car and crash it, and I could get magic done and get better. Or I could eat anything I want, and smoke the 3 packs of cigarettes I used to in the grass, and run around, and like some of you drink, and think, oh, well, I can just have fun, and somebody's going to fix me. Well, it ain't going to happen. Nobody can fix you. You've got to take charge. This has led us to disconnect from the totality of endless life. So it's like this magical, invisible energy source that we don't know how to tap into. And that energy source is what propels not only your body, but the entire universe. My new book that will be out next year, Quantum Human Biology, we're actually describing for the physicist the frequencies that have now been discovered, and how that every one of your cells, as my good colleague who just passed on, Dr. Hunt, taught me, a healthy cell works at 75 hertz. If you have cancer, you may be 5 or 10 hertz. You have diabetes, you may be 15 to 20 hertz. So your cells are fading, no different than a dimmer. And when it goes off, you go off. Now the geneticist, if you ask a real geneticist, he's going to tell you less than 5% of disease comes from genetics. Maybe looking like your father, some very rare genetic diseases may happen, but basically it's not genetics. But what we do know about this is that the chromosome helix, the DNA, literally is 98% phosphorus and 2% oxygen. Now, I want you to remember that. And those of you that are scientifically embraced here, really think about what I'm going to say to you. So your DNA, which differentiates you from every other person and every other life form on this planet, is literally 98% phosphorus and 2% oxygen. Now, we're going to come back to that a little bit later. All of this is born out of an ionic frequency from the limitless and endless totality. And where is that limitless and endless totality? Does anyone know? The source of that? The sun. So every drop of life on this planet comes from the sun. Anyone that would like to debate this? I challenge you to do so later. In the middle of the sun, right now as we sit here speaking, protons are being born. They go bouncing back and forth on neutrons, creating more friction and more energy for 100,000 years. Born now, 100,000 years bouncing on neutrons, getting more energy and friction. When they reach the surface of the sun, they take 8.5 minutes to projectile to green leafy vegetables. What I'm going to now teach you in this 5-second period is all you ever have to know about nutrition. If you learn this, you now have sophisticated nutrition in your head. If somehow you're not simple enough, clear enough, pure enough, and conscious enough to get this, I'll repeat it the second time. Once again, every drop of life comes from the sun. How it projects life to this planet is through protons that take 8.5 minutes to go from the sun to green leafy vegetables. That happened because of evolution. What was the original green leafy vegetable? I just explained it about 5 minutes ago. Called blue-green algae. It was floating because the entire planet was engulfed in water. When land came up, and what was the very first land that came up? Does anyone know? Australia. The continent and country of Australia was 1 million years older than any other land on the planet Earth. And that's why it has uniquely different plants and animals there. Then what happens, this is called photosynthesis, it comes down and creates protein. So every drop of protein comes from a proton. Isn't that interesting? The word proton and protein. Now, somebody knew this, didn't they? How come you didn't learn this in school? How come doctors aren't taught this? Biology, in its purest original sense, maintained a balanced interconnectedness that formed the cycle of life on this planet. And in all the great biological books I've read, basically I learned this from The Lion King, Disney, the cycle of life. I said, that's a beautiful way to describe it, because it's this perpetual, continual, wonderful cycle, one thing depending upon another thing. For instance, someday you're actually going to turn back into what again? Matter. That makes things do what? Grow. Our need to create the perception of solidity forced us to remove ourselves from the energy and balance of all other planetary biology, elements and structure. This is how we do savage things, like go out and slaughter animals thinking we need to eat them. Oh, they got protein. Once again, in 5 seconds, I taught you all you need to know about nutrition. Where does protein come from? And where is it captured? Now, do you think it's intelligent that we let an animal eat a green leafy plant, and then we go and slaughter the animal and think we're getting enough protein? How many of you know that the way you and I choose to eat protein, we're not getting complete proteins? How many of you know that we literally train Olympic athletes? I've never had one in the 43 years I've done this work not come with tears in their eyes, the women and men, and say to me, I feel magnificently strong and resilient and energetic, and my times are better, and my muscles are bigger, and everything's growing when I gave up meat. Now, one thing I was stunned to find out not so long ago is that from the beginning of modern civilization, we've been intrigued by other things that live on the planet, other creatures that live on the planet, other species. And from the beginning of that time, we have cataloged 8,100,000 other creatures. Isn't that amazing? Now, that's not nearly what is here. They tell us every day we lose 20 to 30,000 just in the rainforest alone that we've never identified. There's lots of invisible things, small things, and at the bottom of the ocean has not really been explored as we're killing it anyway. Read about that in my book, Killer Fish, if you think fish and fish oil is good. And bottom line is, when you look at this, you start to recognize that every one of those creatures, 100% of those creatures live on a 100% raw food diet. There's only one creature that chooses not to eat a raw food diet. What's the name of that creature? Who is that? Raise your voice, brethren. Me, little me, silly me. So now let's go back to phosphorus. Remember, what differentiates you from every other creature, every other life form on the planet is phosphorus is your DNA. It surrounds every one of the cells in your body and the nervous system. And your nervous system is what connects to that energetic field, that frequency that we spoke about, that generates from what? Light. L-I-G-H-T. Now what's really interesting, I have a dilemma because I was really not at all believing in a lot of spiritualistic rhetoric from the past. I used to say, that's nonsense. How do they make that up? It's all fantasy and magic. And now in the last 30 years, when I've been studying quantum science, I started to say, my God, how come they were right and the scientists aren't right? Because they always have said, I've never read a theology on the planet's Earth that didn't say we are light. How many of you were brought up Christians or Jewish here? In your text, by the way, they reference that hundreds of times in your text. There is not one theological, valid philosophy that doesn't talk about light and energy. Transference and assimilation of light particles. So when that invisible frequency comes from protons, it is actually attracted to the neurons inside of the nervous system and brain from the phosphorus sheathing that's on the outside of everything. The only materials that pass through the phosphorus sheets are the light particles of the vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and unfortunately, chemical elements. So today, why we have such a problem with neuron diseases, everything from Alzheimer's disease, to Parkinson's disease, to multiple sclerosis, to the most unfortunate disease called autism, that now in the state of New Jersey, which abuts you, 1 out of 45 children have. The lowest in the country is Mississippi, 1 out of 88, because they have virtually no industry. And if you look around the country where there's more chemicals, there's more autism. And now, legitimate statistics from the CDC tell us that it's between 1 out of 50 and 1 out of 60, when in 1983, it was 1 out of 10,000. Not 1883, 1983. That was yesterday. And at the rate of growth, we now understand statistically that by the year 2050, every single child will be placed on the autistic scale. And the biggest cause from chemicals is cancer. Cancer is a heavy metal and chemical problem that gets into your body. And when you're not eating right, and you're not sleeping well, and you're drinking nonsense in your water, including fluoride, and you're putting clothing on that's made out of oil, and here you are, hundreds of you, sitting, listening to me in a health conference, and most of you are wearing polyesters, nylons, and even if you're wearing cotton, if it's no ironing cotton, it has formaldehyde, deadly chemicals in it. Nothing I tell you is an opinion. Everything I'm telling you is a fact tonight. We're taking you into the world of no-nonsense reality tonight. And it's scary because this challenges everything you and I were taught to believe in. We are vessels of light particles, assimilation and emission. So not only do we take in energy, but we emit energy. And if you notice, some people have so much energy, we give them the C name. What do we call people with a lot of energy? They have a lot of charisma. Everyone has that ability. The difference between you and them is they're projecting the energy out. Remember Jack Kennedy when I was a kid? The guy was in incredible pain. You may have liked him or not liked him. But the guy had such a radiance of energy because he was passionate about what he believed in. Are you passionate about what you believe in? And if not, why are you alive? So the number one thing we teach people to bring about homeostasis and health and recovery from disease is to find your passion. You don't find your passion, you don't have a reason to live. That's number one. Then the other tools are pretty simple. We're not the first ones that knew about this. We'd like to be arrogant and tell you that. The Asians spoke about this between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. Without having any of the sciences we have today at all, they realized that the most important system in your body was invisible, called an electrical system. That's called meridians. And somehow, from instinct, they said, if I put a needle here and I put a needle here, it takes care of a problem here. Now, in Western thinking, that sounds bizarre. Western thinking, if you don't see it, it doesn't exist, right? How many of you have had great success with acupuncture? Well, there you are. So they were doing it with needles. We are now doing it with electromagnetic and cold laser machines. And what we're doing at Hippocrates is the future of medicine. They're going to come in kicking and screaming because once you get a machine, you don't have to buy another machine or another bottle. Now, we may improve the technology. Not we're not the ones doing it. We're using the equipment. The quantum physicists are doing this. But once you get the machine, it breaks the paradigm we're speaking about. The money machine is you constantly go back and get more. And when that doesn't work, you get this. This says, this works. And yes, we may improve how rapidly it works and effectively, but it's always going to work. Like a Model A. I don't want to drive down 95 with a Model A, but it drives down 95, doesn't it? It's not a Tesla, but it's a car. And so the entire future of medicine, we're going to tap into the electromagnetic frequencies of the body, and the number one way to do it is with living food, as all the other 8,100,000 creatures on the planet do. As we've done for 60 years with the smartest and the sickest people on the planet. Remember, they don't come to us first because you're corrupted into the machine of nonsense. You have to go through the process. You have to fail. You have to be lied to. You have to be seduced and then find out that it's not working. Then the lucky ones who may have had a neighbor who came to us or may have just by chance read this in the paper and showed up here tonight and didn't go out and reject it because I am challenging everything you've ever been taught, but say, wow, that provoked something in me. That scared the shit out of me, but it provoked something in me. That's who we work with, and they're sick. We've had more stage 4 diseases come to Hippocrates and reverse the disease than any institution in the history of healthcare. We're not talking about natural healthcare. We're talking about healthcare. Just today, I'm speaking to a woman that had brain and liver cancer. Came to us 9 years ago, completely recovered by 6 years ago. She was told by 4 doctors, you're going to die. I said, what do you do to those doctors? She said, send them pictures of myself every Christmas.
But did she tell them where she went?
Doesn't matter where she went. She went to herself. She went to herself. She went to her source. She went to her love. She went to her power. She went to God that each and every one of us have inside of us. That's where she went. We just put people back on the path that you've already been on. You just got lost. So isolated phosphorus, which is who you are and connects you to the universe as we know it. When isolated from all other chemical compounds, phosphorus makes a hissing sound and disappears from this dimension. So what we're literally saying is 98% of what differentiates you from all other creatures literally evaporates into the energetics of the universe if it's not bound, in your case, to oxygen. Now, isn't it ironic that what differentiates you from complete energy and frequency to a biological form is 2% oxygen? And when you're born, the first sign of life is what? And when we pass, the first sign of death is what? When you study these things, you start to believe there is a God. You really do. You start to believe that everything works perfectly except our minds. You start to say, wow, every day I have to humble myself and let go of nonsense I adapted as truth and say, my God, there's so much we don't know, but isn't it wonderful when we peel away the deceptions of what we believe, how it really does beautifully work and how everything is perfectly fine. And we're going to come very soon, by the middle of this century, to a point where people will not be enduring and suffering major diseases because we're going to be working with you on very subtle but very powerful levels. Matter of fact, 35 years ago when I began to use electromagnetic therapy, the whole premise then was high electromagnetic therapy pound the heck out of the disorder, the virus, the bacteria, the fungus, the cancer. Now we realize the total opposite. In 35 years, the more subtle the frequency is, that works very much like the human cell that's healthy, the better it is. Phosphorus absorbs light and transmutes those light waves in slow time sequences to different frequencies, thus creating the state of phosphorescence or being phosphorescent. The one human being that we all see is very phosphorescent is called an infant. You ever notice that? You could have the most nasty person in the world. You got a baby in the room with them, they melt. We just love babies. Why? Because they're pure energy. They haven't corrupted themselves at that point. That they are still connected to that force of life. You also have something interesting. You have 100 trillion cells. So whenever you think you're poor, think about it. 100 trillion cells you have. Not billion, trillion. You have magnetites. Magnetites are magnetic particles contained in all cells that directly connect you to all other magnetic fields. So I'll give you an example. Everyone goes home tonight. One of you stay here. We shut all the lights. It's pitch dark in here. You can't see anything. Now, I quietly sneak into the room, and you're standing here in the middle of the room. You don't see me. You don't hear me. But when I get close, do you feel me? Isn't that interesting? So when you're, for instance, near an ocean and you love the feeling, you're feeling the electromagnetic energy. My friend finally got me years ago when I was challenging him in matter-based ways. He said to me, have you ever seen love? I said, yes. He said, you're lying. You've never seen love. He said, you feel love. You express love. You're blessed. You're in love. But you've never seen love. That's what we're talking about here, people. We're talking about that connectivity to the energy. The process of decomposition generates proteins, vitamins, minerals, electromagnetic frequencies, and bacteria that nourish plants as they grow, collecting more ionic energy from the total. What this means is your physical body is really light and frequency. What keeps your biological body there is transmuted protons. Now, what do I mean from that? Protons come directly from the sun to you or to the plant, and you eat it. Protons also go to the soil. And when this energy called protons go to the soil, it decomposes matter. So like I said to you 38 minutes ago, someday you're going to become soil. Isn't that interesting? So you are literally biologically soil. And we'll explain this to you. We'll go back to the sun again. We go to the plant, a new way to look at it. So the plant, after the energy leaves it, becomes soil. That literally becomes earth, becomes minerals, and becomes stones. The other thing I used to think was complete nonsense to a physicist friend of mine taught me better. I said, all this crystal baloney and rock stuff, I said, it's stupid. I said, who believes in that nonsense? And he let me talk and put my foot in my mouth. And he said, do you have any electronic equipment? I said, yeah, I don't really like to use it. He said, what do you think propels every electronic equipment? Now, I didn't know this. Crystals. Did you know that? And he said, when we were kids, you won a science award because you did that. Did you forget it? When you were 7 years old, you put a crystal in a box, a wooden box, and it became a radio. And I got red in my face, and I said, yes, I forgot that. He said, never again say that energy. Matter of fact, the protons from the sun are most collected in minerals. So why you were attracted to, originally why jewels were there, they were to help healing. Now we use them, in cosmetic ways. We don't use them for the real reason they're there. And most of what you do are not. And so every piece of electronic is propelled from the energy that's picking this invisible energy up, these waves that let you speak on a cell phone in China sitting in this room. And stones, how many of you ever did these stone massages? Another thing I poo-pooed, about 15 years ago, somebody said, oh, I'm massaging you, I'm going to put some stones on you. He said, get the hell, you're going to put a stone on me. Second time I went and said, do you have stones? Now watch this. That all changes. It's a cycle of life, as Disney taught us, and becomes plants that become composition. Isn't that amazing? So the cycle of life that makes your physical, biological body is literally soil. That's protons that break down matter that become solid structure. But who you really are is light and frequencies. So we look at every person that comes to us, we did Jackie, and we teach the doctors when they come to us for doctor days, and the researchers when we get together, that we now have to peel away the biology and really get to the core frequency. And what do you think the easiest way to do that? With a lot of slick equipment that we're talking about? Starts with an E and has an M in it. Does anyone know what that is? I know you don't have it together here on this one much. Has an O in it too, EMO. We're going to get the fourth letter? They would have gotten this really quick out west. Emotions. Emotions! The number one way to tap in to the energetic field is emotions. Now, by the way, have you ever noticed when you're laughing and you're dancing and you're running around, you feel like a child again? You feel alive? And again, go back to the infant. The infant is pure humanity. You and I are on a very adulterated humanity. The unadulterated are the children. And so you've got to know that that's what we aspire. Water directly collects energy from the sun at a greater level of frequency since it has less structure. This form of nourishment is essential to maintain all life. Now, in our way of thinking, matter-based thinking, in engineering, architecture, and Newtonian physics, 350-year-old physics, we say the larger a structure, the more energy. I'm going to tell you it's the opposite. The less structure, the more energy. Because it's endless. Do you know we're sitting in a room with water floating around invisibly here that we're breathing in? It's called humidity. It's endless. The Alps are definitive. There's a certain structure. Now, somebody probably has actually figured out all of the Alps, where the mountains start, how high they go, how wide they are, how thick they are, and said, here's how much mass is in that. But how much mass is there in water? It doesn't stop in the oceans and the lakes or in your spigot or in the hose. It's everywhere. And it's perpetual, and it's a continuum too. How does water move? How do we purify water? It's called distillation and rain. So the water is picked up and evaporated. Its invisible nanoelements also collect ionic energy at a high level, affording greater nourishment. So now we realize that water and healing of water, let's go back to spiritualists because they had it together before the scientists. They basically realized if you were a Christian, you were baptized at one point. Where do you think that came from? The Hindus do the same thing. The Buddhists do the same thing. They recognize the energy and the power from water. And today we understand that water in its purest sense carries the highest amount of electromagnetic frequency. And you're 70 to 75% what? 80% of your brain is what? And a lot of these so-called dyslexic and attention deficit disorder problems, which I don't even believe is a disease, are no more than just 3 or 4% dehydration of the brain. Oxygen is essential for all life. You breathe it and you get it from water. How many of you know that the ocean, when you're looking at that powerful large ocean, it's 87% oxygen? Did you know that? And when you have a lot of sodium, like at the Dead Sea or Salt Lake, it's sodium and oxygen. So you can actually float on top of it. So you're levitating in a virtual way in those areas. Hartman out at the University of Nebraska said, biologically, how we all get sick, every disease, and how we age is free radical damage. Now, you've heard the word free radical damage. He was right. We haven't really changed that. And what a free radical damage is when a cell, healthy cell, because you haven't eaten properly, nourished it, hydrated it, you're under stress where adrenaline is pumping out and poisoning it, dies. And what's left are those electrons we spoke about earlier. Remember, every cell has electric in it, magnetites, magnet and electric. They become renegades, and they start to spin wildly through the body. Now, electric is attracted to electric, and the electric in your body is contained in the cell. And if we have enough electric in a cell, but a free radical comes and tries to get in and adds extra electric, the cell dies. So all premature aging and all disease, including cancer, on a biological surface level, comes from free radical damage. Now, of course, all the things we spoke about, chemicals, malnourishment, blah, 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 blah. But today we know it's called AGEs. So the latest thing that the Germans pretty much established is this called AGEs. And the AGEs take us one step more in free radical damage. Now, a healthy cell has oxygen, water, protein, the sheathing that we spoke about, vitamins cover the cell, minerals act as the electromagnetic harbinger of the cell, and essential fatty acid acts as the gasoline of the cell. These elements, which their varied frequencies are attracted to the magnetic energy of the cell. This allows building and life-maintaining processes. It also expels exhausted and used matter from the cell. The elemental table, you all remember that. We learned it in school. There's about 115 elements or so that we perceive make up the universe as we know it. Well, Discovery did an extraordinary documentary. I think it was 2 or 3 hours, as I recall. And I just noticed, I think it's on Netflix. Get on there and look at it. They're going to actually show you behind the scenes. They're going to show you the electromagnetic frequency of every element. It's amazing. So they're actually going to say, here's what we think the element is, but here's what it really is. And they actually animate and show you how the electromagnetics and electrons move differently in every one of the elements. Which of the elements have the most electromagnetic frequency? Anyone know? The metals. And one that has really, really tough electromagnetic frequency is called uranium. What do you call that on the street? Radiation. And that's what we're getting way, way too much of. Where do you get it from? Cell phones, laptop computers, microwaves, routers in your house. How many of you don't have a router in your house? Not a person in here. How many of you have seen the documentary with cell towers out of New York City? Pretty simple stuff, basic math. Here's a cell tower. They looked at 1 mile away, 3/4 of a mile away, half a mile away, next block, cancer rates. More cancer rates, less cancer rates. 25 years ago, where they said a train track, people who live close proximity to a train track have higher amounts of neurological problems and cancers. I never thought of that once in my life. But why not? And when people come in with Gauss meters, I did this on planes. You know, I travel constantly. I did it on planes. You never want to go first class. And who do you think the sickest professionals are? No? Doctors are on the top 5 radiologists, but not all doctors are the sickest. Number 1 are pilots. Number 2 are flight attendants. How many of you know when I get on a plane in New York City and I fly to Los Angeles, which I'm going to do from West Palm Beach on Tuesday of next week to Los Angeles, you're receiving 18 x-rays, equivalent of 18 x-rays. If I go to China, 45 to 62, depending upon if it's night or day. Where does the radiation come from? We've been talking about it all day. Protons from the sun. And they're radioactive. And so the very thing that gives you life in too high amounts kill you. Isn't that amazing? So it's a very subtle thing. It's like tightrope walking. You know, if you tightrope walk properly, you're going to be fine. All of us learned about water in school just like the periodic table. We learned that water is liquid. When you freeze it, it's what? Solid. And when you boil it, it's what? Vapor. Again, that's really not what water is. Water is the conductor and the projector of electromagnetic frequency. Once again, what's your body made of? What's your brain made of? 80% water. I went years ago reluctantly to a meeting with the leading expert on water therapies out of Germany, a professor from the University of Hamburg. I went in there reluctantly, and I didn't want him to stop. I asked him about 35 questions. He had the science of why water is therapeutic to you. Now, we have a lot more today from Asia, but it was like stunning to me. I never thought one of the things this guy spoke about for 6 hours. And so why we go to spas and lay there and feel remarkably good, or you get into the ocean, is that it's actually grounding the electromagnetic frequency in every cell in your body. And where were you for the first 9 months of your life? Floating upside down. But we forget these things somehow. So what water really is, pure water, not the water you're drinking out of the tap or most of your filters that don't work, but pure water basically is going to be your connectivity to the electromagnetic frequency that makes your cells work the way they should. When understanding these principles, it is imperative that we consume only pure and life-filled nourishment. The kind of diet we're talking about is about 80 to 85% water. When you look at the human body, it's about the same with evaporation taken off. When I really started to learn these things, we used to have some volunteer researchers and physicians up in Boston that quietly would sneak in the back door at night because they would be telling their patients they were going to die. They'd come to Hippocrates and recover, so they were just absolutely puzzled at why that happened. And so we had a lot of incredible minds. I was just a kid that would come in and volunteer with us. And one doctor said to me, what do you really think about this diet on a basic level? And I started to rumble something, and he said, no. He said, what you've got to understand is that this diet actually mimics what the body's composition is. That it's hydrogen, it's oxygen, and it's water. And what governs the universe, as we know it, are hydrogen, oxygen, and water. Nourishment that resonates with the total of all life energizes your biology, giving you the potential to let go of your old preconceived notions and accept the omnipresent consciousness that abounds. Now, how many of you here have adopted to a very clean, pure, plant-based, raw diet? You cannot be unconscious on this diet. That's what I learned. I was completely brain dead. I didn't change my diet for any other reason than I was so fat I was going to explode. That's why I changed, by the way. Somebody convinced me at one point that it wasn't a smart thing to be eating a lot of animal foods as much as I loved them. I mean, I loved animal food. I wasn't born a vegan, I can tell you that now. I used to take bologna and fry it and dip it in butter. Salami wasn't fat enough for me. you take little bits of lobsters and dump them, and I would boil them in butter and then dip them again in butter. I don't know how I survived, I'll tell you. And then I changed for a moral reason. I said, I like dogs, so I'll change. I lost 120 pounds. And then this woke up. I was like in darkness, in a cloud. I couldn't see anything. I was going right along. Oh, I was a smart kid in the class because I could recite the best. I could do exactly what they said. I was like a monkey or a seal. I finally realized the smartest one isn't the smartest one. The guy in the back throwing spitballs is probably the smart guy. Guy who can take the test exactly well. We're the dumb ones. We're going along with the program in darkness. And I started to question everything, and I started to see everything. I started to say, my God. And it wasn't because I wanted to change anything, just my diet to lose weight. It's because once you tap into the energy of consciousness, and let me explain this to you, consciousness prevails, and it will win. Now, the other thing, the cerebellum is what you're being taught. You go for a PhD in psychiatry today or psychology, they're going to say the cerebellum is where you create consciousness. It's wrong. Consciousness is outside of us. It's not inside of us. It's omnipresent. It's everywhere. It's truth and knowledge and wisdom is abundant, and what we do is we accept it or not accept it. John Lennon said it so beautifully, there's nothing that hasn't been done, and he's right. There's no wisdom that hasn't been discovered, no knowledge that's not available. It's just, do we accept that or do we not accept it? And what I said, as a young lady yelled out earlier, did they go to Hippocrates? I'm not interested promoting Hippocrates. I'm interested you taking back your life. And yes, we can help you do that, and we can guide you, and we can love you and support you, because it's hard to do it in this sick world out here.
I hope you enjoyed that talk by Dr. Clement, and that you will join us next Wednesday for a continuation, an interview with Dr. Jackie Campisi, who is using the Hippocrates approach for stage 4 metastatic cancer of the spine, and meet her supportive, living food growing husband, Greg. We'll see you then.